Police scanners report people trying to burn vehicles at another lot owned by CarSource. 2 minutes later, Rittenhouse hurries away from the gas station holding a fire extinguisher. Rosenbaum, walking in the same direction, begins to run towards Rittenhouse. Rosenbaum throws a plastic bag at Rittenhouse. Swart said the bag contained items from Rosenbaum's stay at the hospital. As they're running, someone nearby fires a gun. 4 other shots explode, and Rosenbaum falls. 3 more shots are heard. Rittenhouse runs around parked cars and looks at Rosenbaum. He calls black, according to court records, then runs away. Rittenhouse falls, and a protester hits him with a skateboard. Rittenhouse shoots the skater, Anthony Huber, fatally injuring him. Rittenhouse shoots again, wounding another protester, Gage Grosskreutz.
And attempts to disarm her. Rittenhouse shoots him in the chest. Here is Gage Grosskreutz, with his gun drawn. He also gets shot and calls out for help.
Rittenhouse approaches officers with his arms up, but the police drive by him.
Well, hello, you degenerate sinners. And today, on Fundie Sunday, we're taking a look at a different kind of fundamentalist. Usually we go for religious fundamentalists, both Christian, Islamic, etc. But today, we're taking a look at the first of many socialist fundamentalists. And yes, I will consider this a fundamentalist religious position because it is based on utter dogma and political tribalism. The cult of the left. Brenton Lengel, who I have debated on capitalism versus socialism, he's a very thin-skinned individual. One might even say a coward. He refused to ever debate me again because I had the audacity to point out that the Indian famines were the result of monsoons, seasonal weather, and the government expropriating land, which is in fact socialism, so he couldn't blame it on capitalism. Brenton Lengel is lockstep with every dogmatic leftist position. And while I hate to bore everyone with yet another Rittenhouse reaction, I just couldn't resist this one, so let's just dive in.
Thanks, James. Over the past few weeks, the Kyle Rittenhouse case has dominated the perpetually churning, fetid waters of the culture war, which our mass media has gleefully whipped into the beginnings of a rot-filled hurricane for clout, clicks, and profit.
He really likes throwing prose in there, but as we'll see, not many facts. He likes to sound fancy. This is kind of like Michael Eric Dyson.
Negro. Highly intelligent, articulate, verbose. Capable of rhetorical fury at the drop of a hat.
Step 1. Open Notepad and write how you feel. Next step. Go to Google and copy-paste every word from the notepad to find the most obscure synonyms. Final step. Form a sentence using expensive words and memorize it. Use it as your trap card. When the plebs least expect it, layeth the smackdown on those bitch boys.
The moral mendacity of his viciousness into a nation he has turned into his psychic commode.
At 5:30 to tweet, he excretes the feces of his moral depravity into a nation he has turned into his psychic commode. That's what he's doing.
Every morning he stands up to excrete the feces of his moral depravity into a nation he has turned into his psychic commode.
This is a president who rises every morning to excrete the moral, the feces of his moral depravity into a nation that he's turned into his psychic commode.
I'll also add this was just hours post-verdict. So we'll see here that Brent's main tactic here is to just repeat the failed tactics of the prosecution ad nauseum without adding anything. Never has there been a more scummy prosecutor since our current vice president.
I want to bring the conversation back to the broken criminal justice system that is disproportionately negatively impacting black and brown people all across this country today. Now, Senator Harris says she's proud of her record as a prosecutor and that she'll be a prosecutor president, but I'm deeply concerned about this record. There are too many examples to cite, but she put over 1,500 people in jail for marijuana violations and then laughed about it when she was asked if she ever smoked marijuana. She blocked evidence. She blocked evidence that would have freed an innocent man from death row until the courts forced her to do so. She kept people in prison beyond their sentences to use them as cheap labor for the state of California. And she fought to keep cash bail system in place that impacts poor people in the worst kind of way.
Thank you, Congresswoman. Senator Harris, your response.
As the elected Attorney General of California, I did the work of significantly reforming the criminal justice system of a state of 40 million people, which became a national model for the work that needs to be done. And I am proud of that work. And I am proud of making a decision to not just give fancy speeches or be in a legislative body and give speeches on the floor, but actually doing the work of being in the position to use the power that I had to reform a system that is badly in need of reform. That is why we created initiatives that were about re-entering former offenders and getting them counseling. It is why, and because I know that criminal justice system is so broken, that I am an advocate for what we need to do to not only decriminalize, but legalize marijuana in the United States.
I want to bring Congresswoman Gabbard back in. Your response?
The bottom line is, Senator Harris, when you were in a position to make a difference and an impact in these people's lives, you did not. And worse yet, in the case of those who were on death row, innocent people, you actually blocked evidence from being revealed that would have freed them until you were forced to do so. There is no excuse for that. And the people who suffered under your reign as prosecutor, you owe them an apology.
Senator Harris.
Playing a constant Pied Piper dirge that, in my opinion, will ultimately lead everyone marching to their tune on a path straight into the bowels of hell. I am not that
Very dramatic. Straight into the bowels of hell. The fetid waters. Cut through the bullshit, dude. Just get to the facts.
But thinking back only a decade or two, it's almost quaint that the war which the American left and right were most intent on waging on each other was the war on Christmas, which, for the record, cannot and should not end until Christmas withdraws its troops and forever ends its illegal and immoral occupation of the sovereign month of November. But I digress.
A decent joke, actually, and I agree. No Christmas music in November. Or at least before Thanksgiving. After Thanksgiving, fine. Pre-Thanksgiving, I will die on this hill. I will fight a war for this. If there's a holiday between you and the holiday you're celebrating, no. That's a bridge too far. That deserves prison time, in my estimation. Anyway, decent joke. Ill-timed and ill-placed, however. He should not be wasting time in his opening statement like this, when his opening statement so far is completely bare of facts. Anyway.
What are we talking about when we ask if Rittenhouse's acquittal on all 5 counts was correct? 3 counts of homicide and 2 counts of recklessly endangering safety. His acquittal on the last of which seems utterly baffling to me because being that Rittenhouse's AR-15 was loaded with a clip of 30 rounds with a full metal jacket. So, fun fact about me. In college,
so the fact that he was using full metal jacket rounds means that he was endangering lives. So what bullet would Brenton have deemed a safe bullet, I wonder? Hollow points that actually are more recommended for self-defense, actually, because they expand and fragment in the target, which is more likely to kill the target. Gage Grosskreutz might not have been alive today had he been using hollow points. Full metal jacket is basically just standard range rounds. It is recommended that you don't use them for self-defense because they are more likely to harm bystanders. But again, I would like to reiterate, there is no such thing as a safe bullet, as if hollow points would not be endangering bystanders. They can still travel the same distance. It's just that they're not going to penetrate through as many layers of people or barriers. So, if shooting Full Metal Jacket is endangerment, then so is shooting hollow points, because there are people standing around, there's nothing in between the people that hollow point would be stopped by, and they would do more damage to the actual flesh targets that they hit. Just throwing out random buzzwords, which is what people who know nothing about guns tend to say.
College, I had a roommate who owned an AK-47. During a paranoid fugue state, he wound up firing off 2 shots of very similar ammo inside the tiny campus apartment we shared. The bullets went through our door, across the quad, through the wall of the Chinese foreign exchange students in the other building, through their living room, out their kitchen window, and buried themselves in the brick of the building 2 buildings down from us. Miraculously, no one was hurt, and no.
Yeah, a wall is basically plaster, and it went through a wall and some glass, he said, and buried itself in brick. Yeah, these are bullets. They're going to go through stuff. I can't stress this enough. There is no such thing as a safe bullet, except one that's not loaded in a gun.
No one called the police. My point in bringing it up is that I know viscerally just how stupid and negligent it is to bring a weapon like that, loaded with that particular ammo, to a protest with crowds.
How is it substantially different than loading it with any other type of ammo? This is just ridiculous. If it's dangerous to arm yourself with full metal jackets, which is just standard range ammo, then it's dangerous to have your gun loaded with any type of ammo. This is such a massive red herring, and I'll just continue. There's nothing more to say about this.
Ostensibly for personal protection. It is an absolute goddamn miracle that no bystanders were killed. But that aside...
Not really, because Kyle had excellent trigger discipline and aimed only at the people who were directly in front of him. And he was on the ground aiming upward, at least for 2 of them. So, also, it doesn't defeat the right to self-defense. Just because a stray bullet might go hit someone else, you're still allowed to do whatever is necessary to the threat that's in front of you.
Again, I repeat, what are we talking about? If we're talking legally, this...
You don't know what you're talking about, so it's a good question for you to ask.
It was a jury trial, and by definition, in our system, any decision by that jury was the correct one. So I'm not going to...
I am so glad that your average random selection of Kyle's Kenoshan peers unanimously don't buy Brenton's horrid arguments.
Argue with that. Nor am I going to complain about the judge. Was he unreasonably deferent towards Rittenhouse? Absolutely. But that doesn't surprise...
No, because he withheld things that a defense wanted to put forward as far as the state of mind and criminal history of all 3 of Kyle's assailants. So the judge was actually being very, very fair. And there were several times where a reasonable judge could have declared a mistrial based on the constitutional violations that the prosecution tried on a witness and Kyle himself, questioning why they thought to retain an attorney and why they didn't say anything to media. They have a right to have an attorney and a right to not say anything, and the prosecution tried to use this as evidence of their guilt. This is a blatant violation. The DA, Binger, should be disbarred for this. He should be disbarred for a lot of stuff he did. He should be disbarred. He should be tried in court for pointing that rifle at the jury. Because as we know, as people who actually know even the basics of gun safety, there's no such thing as a safe gun. There's no such thing as an unloaded gun. Period. To act as if there's ever such thing as a safe gun is to be unsafe with guns. So to act as if they're always unsafe is the safe way to treat guns. And the prosecution tried to say that because Kyle shot the gun, he intended to murder these people. No. Just because you intend to harm something or destroy something with a gun in self-defense does not mean you intend to kill it, but that is a risk you take, and that is a reasonable risk when defending your life.
Surprise me in the slightest. The state has extreme difficulty bringing its violence to bear against reactionaries like Rittenhouse, because ultimately the state's primary function...
No, it doesn't. People who weren't even being violent at the January 6th riot have been held to the fullest extent of the law. The government officials keep coming out and saying the right-wing terrorism is the actual terrorism we have to be concerned about in this country. And they go as far as to lump libertarians in with all those people. So no, this is a myth cooked up by left-wing extremists that the government just wants to give a pass to all right-wing reactionary people. That this is the only reason Kyle was let off. Not the fact that it was shown that that all of his assailants were the aggressors in the situation and were putting Kyle's life in danger. No, Brenton has to boil this down to, he's white and he's right-wing, therefore all of the jury members unanimously let him off the hook and bought the defense. Because somehow all of these random jury members that were selected randomly out of the population, whittled down by jury selection on both sides, and then randomly selected again for the final verdict, they were all somehow racist or reactionaries who were just waiting to get Kyle off.
Is to secure and defend valuable property. Or as noted by commie soy boy beta cuck Adam Smith, and as he put it in Wealth of Nations, civil government, so far as it is instituted for the security of property, is in reality instituted for the defense of the rich against the poor, or of those who have some property against those who have none at all.
So what's wrong with defending property? Look at this smug asshole. What is wrong with defending property? Are you not allowed to stop people from burning your shit down? What is this with the commies? They say, oh, they cry all the time. Oh, people are so dependent on making money to survive in this capitalist system. And yet they're okay with burning down their ability to make money. And he wants to say anyone who owns property is a rich person. And if you defend property, you're defending the rich against the poor. As if poor people don't own property that they need to defend. And as if some small-time car lot owners are members of the ultra-rich capitalist plutocracy class. He's ignoring the reality that Kyle was there defending minority, immigrant, small business. These were not rich people. These are not institutionally rich people. These are not people who inherited their wealth. They were immigrants who started their own business, and they didn't want rioters to burn down their livelihood. And Brenton's just spitting on that because property equals rich people.
And Rittenhouse didn't damage property. He killed people. And the state...
Because they were about to do imminent bodily harm to him. I don't know why that's so hard. You killed people. Yeah, there's justified killing, so what's your point?
State, which is to say the social institutions of the military, the police, and its systems of prisons, along with a corresponding legal apparatus of which the judge is an extension, doesn't really care about people, except as a means to an end in its quest to protect property.
It doesn't care about people. It just upholds the right of people to defend their lives. Somehow, though, Brenton is strawmanning and saying that Kyle killed these people in defense of property. He was in the area in defense of property, but no, Kyle did not kill these people in defense of property. He killed them in defense of his body, his life. This is truly egregious. This is your mind on ideological possession. He's possessed, literally, by this idea. It is a mind virus that has taken over his critical faculties and is now controlling his body and his mind. This is what actual possession is. This is what an actual demon is. I'm not saying supernatural spirits. This is as close as it gets to real demons.
So it was absolutely ridiculous to expect anything else from a judge, but deference towards a boy who took it upon himself to volunteer for the state's duties. As I have said before, the purpose of the state is not...
He didn't volunteer for the state's duties, but he was helping supplement some of the state's duties, as cops actually thanked him actively for helping them out because they couldn't handle the riots.
We appreciate you guys, we really do.
He was not acting in the capacity of a law enforcement officer. He was not performing arrests. He certainly wasn't performing executions, as I'm sure Brenton believes. And again, what is the problem? This is what bootlicking actually looks like. You're not allowed to defend yourself. You have to wait for a copper to come do it for you. You're not allowed to help people defend themselves and defend their property from damages. You have to wait till a copper comes and does it for you, or you have to let the mob just walk all over you. This is the insanity that you get when you just start off with the position, well, he was against the riots that I like, he was against the protests that I like, therefore he's wrong, and I'm going to argue myself into a pretzel no matter what in defense of this original position.
Not to keep the peace. Rather, peace is kept in order to keep the property. So this debate is not and should not be about...
Is he saying that you cannot violate the peace to defend property because the peace itself protects property? What?
Is kept in order. Said before, the purpose of the state is not to keep the peace. Rather, peace is kept in order to keep the property.
What? So who keeps the peace? If anything, if the state is justified in doing anything, it is in keeping the peace. That is their sole duty. This is the mind of madness.
So this debate is not and should not be about the legal outcome of the case, as this has already been decided. Rather, we should be talking about it as if this outcome was desirable. And I can tell you categorically that if you are the sort of person who values law, order, and social cohesion, if you are the type of person who is intensely disturbed by violence in our streets, if you hold our traditions of individualism and liberty as sacrosanct and believe deeply in our right to bear arms and our right to self-defense, Rittenhouse's acquittal is the absolute worst disaster that could have happened as a...
What? So if you believe in the right to bear arms, if you believe in peace and order, then you must side with the people who attacked first. You must side with the people who decided to break the peace and try and infringe his right to bear arms, if you care about the right to bear arms and if you care about peace and order. Excuse me? And this is why I call socialism the creationism of politics, because it is just an inversion of all truths. You just take a fact and you invert it, and it is a socialist opinion. And it is filled with inherent contradiction.
As a direct result of this case. And I hope that you can take off your culture war glasses and look at the situation soberly and objectively and realize why.
Soberly and objectively, Kyle was the one engaging in self-defense, not the people who were attacking him. There's no case that can be made otherwise. They tried it in court. They tried all these dirty, underhanded tactics because they couldn't do it honestly. And we're going to see Brent repeat the same pattern.
What has happened in Kenosha is not a victory for self-defense, because every member of that crowd had a right to self-defense. Yet
that is only true if merely being armed in public is a provocation, is an attack, is a threat, is endangering people, and is an aggressive move.
Yet only Rittenhouse's was respected and endorsed by the state. This is something we...
Correct, because only Rittenhouse was actually being attacked, and he was the one defending himself. Merely existing with a weapon is not an attack on the people in the crowd, thus their response, they did not have a right to self-defense. But let's say Kyle did something that would reasonably provoke these people. Self-defense is not a zero-sum game. Both people could be reasonably acting in self-defense.
Often forget, because the crowd was contrasted with the defendant. We are individuals and experience reality as such, but the crowd is simply a collection of more individuals, all with the same rights and responsibilities as Kyle Rittenhouse.
Correct, which is why when they engaged and initiated the attacks, it was Kyle who then had the right to self-defense.
Single one of them, us really, has families, dreams, hopes, loves, lives, and heartbreak. But because
Kyle did not just decide to attack these people out of nowhere.
Because of the limitations of our language and our consciousness and the nature of legal proceedings, the crowd gets abstracted into a mob by our lying common sense.
No, it was very specifically about 4 people. Gage Grosskreutz aimed his gun, faked a surrender. Anthony Huber hit Kyle in the head with a skateboard, a hard wooden and metal object that can cause grievous injury, especially to the head. Rosenbaum, who verbally threatened, threw things at Kyle, chased him down, and physically assaulted him. And of course, Jump Kick Man.
And we don't put ourselves in their shoes. Instead, with the aid of the media, we project ourselves into the main character. And in this drama, that is active shooter Kyle Rittenhouse.
No, he is the one being accused, so there's... so he thinks that that's the main character. Okay, so every person ever accused in a trial is apparently the main character. This dude really does not know how to isolate variables, because the media was demonizing this kid, for sure.
Rittenhouse is basically what you would have had in a school shooter. Cross state lines to supposedly protect property? No, he was going out to shoot people.
And it's not good that a 17-year-old vigilante, arguably a domestic terrorist, picked up a rifle, drove to a different state to shoot people.
The vast majority of protests in Kenosha have been peaceful, and the violence has come from an outside Trump supporter. Kyle Rittenhouse, the armed teenage vigilante.
Shooting wildly, running around, acting like rent-a-cop.
Radicalized by Trumpism, took his AR-15 to Kenosha and became a killer.
The 17-year-old accused of committing those 2 murders was a Trump supporter.
It's a tragedy.
Do you condemn that?
It's a tragedy.
Do you condemn it?
His testimony yesterday really hurt his credibility because of the way some view him as milking to try to get those tears going and to try to get those sobs going. Yes, if he illegally has a gun, the law does not allow him to use the self-defense claim unless he's able to show that despite his provocation, he retreated and did everything he could to avoid using deadly force, but nonetheless nonetheless had to in order to protect an imminent threat of death. And so in order to be able to reclaim the self-defense law in the light of his illegal conduct or the self-defense mode of proof for acquittal, in order to do that, he has to be able to show that he testify about the fact that he did everything he could to retreat.
How big of an effect do you think that this judge's rulings have had on the trial? He's made some controversial ones, in the past already.
Yeah. Wow. So I know, even watching it at the top of the hour here, right? I know that causes many people at home to be shocked and quite frankly shudder.
But there's an important concept here, provocation. If the prosecution can show that Kyle Rittenhouse created the dangerous scenario, then his self-defense claim will fail. And so prosecutors are going to argue.
The whole context of Rittenhouse coming there was around a protest of a police brutality situation. And this was not like a guy was defending himself at his house. He came to confront a situation of protest. And those kind of protests, I think Vice President Harris is familiar with. And I think that many of us that do protest, as you say, I hate National Action Network, are concerned that you send a signal now that people can come into a protest and exacerbate a situation or get involved in a situation and kill people and say, I was just defending myself. That's very frightening.
The underlying racism that is institutionalized in the United States. We end up in a circumstance like you had here in Kenosha and Havertz.
The charges, one of the lesser charges against Rittenhouse here, is that he was unlawfully, as a minor, in possession of a firearm. He's inarguably essentially guilty of that. There's some defense that there's some hunting law that would allow him to hold a gun. I don't think that's going anywhere.
Isn't legal? It is not a short-barreled shotgun or a short-barreled rifle, yes. Either by barrel or by overall length? Correct. All right, and then count 6 is dismissed.
Liar! But the media do not treat every defendant the same. Nor does the audience. They are not the main character, and they do not have sympathy just because they are the defendant. Nor do they just because of their race or their political leanings. Sorry, it's the facts of the case that the jury considered.
So, take this another way. Imagine that you were in the streets that night, that you were the one standing there as a minor, a literal child, took a semi-automatic weapon capable of firing more than 5 football fields of range, loaded with rounds that can blow through not just their targets, but doors.
Which is legal for him to do.
Doors, walls, and windows. You don't know this kid from Adam, and suddenly someone's dead. And he's...
There were a bunch of people with assault rifles
walking away, and all the while he's lying. He's just shot a man dead, and he says he didn't, and he's dressed like the people who've been pointing their guns at you all day.
So yeah, I guess the reasonable thing to do is to rush the guy, just like the guy who got shot. Yeah, that's real reasonable. What is your point? To put yourself again in harm's way? Just because someone got shot, that means that now you have the right and onus to attack that person?
I don't doubt that Kyle Rittenhouse may have been frightened. Many cowards are. And even if he wasn't...
Wow. This guy is the biggest coward. He's an intellectual coward. He just throws that out there like a petty child, while he himself is as big a coward as anyone. He would use force to defend his life. That's not being a coward, by the way. That's just being normal. But as an intellectual coward, Brenton is on the level of Chunk Uyghur in that he's afraid to discuss the actual facts of the case and instead is laying the success of the defense on the fact that he's right-wing or he's the main character, completely ignoring the arguments that actually won the case, that were actually made by the defense. The defense was not arguing that because Kyle is a good conservative boy, that because he's white, or that because he's should be seen as the main character, or that he's the survivor, or that he has the bigger gun. that he should be acquitted. No. Brenton is avoiding the actual arguments that won this case, like the plague, at all costs, because he's a coward.
It's not that hard to pretend, which is why his lawyer was able to make ridiculous, hysterical claims, like alleging that the guy who knocked off Rittenhouse's hat was trying to take his head off. Like really, dude? In what world was his head going to be smashed off his body by an open hand swatting upwards at his baseball?
Are you serious? You think the term trying to take his head off is referring literally to trying to remove Kyle's head from his body? This is the height of intellectual cowardice, of intellectual dishonesty. This is pure bad faith. He knows what the term knock your head off means in English. It doesn't literally mean to knock your head off. It's a figure of speech for hitting someone really hard in the head.
Cap. Get the fuck out of here with your weird, shouty tortoise.
What? Weird, shouty tortoise? Get the fuck out of here with your faux not understanding how English works bullshit.
Rosenbaum, the frightening assailant, was all of 5'4", literally Tom Cruise size and 150 pounds soaking wet. You can see from the video.
Oh, he was short, therefore he can't take your weapon or assault you. What is this argument? Excuse me? Have you ever seen a fucking honey badger? Have you ever seen a small cat just totally destroy a grown human? A crazy, scrappy person can do a lot of damage to you, especially if they get a gun, because a gun is an equalizer. Oh boy, like what even is this argument? He was short, therefore you can't defend yourself against him.
He was aggressive, but no one treated him as a serious threat.
He was aggressive. There you go. Done.
He was totally ignored by older, more experienced militia types, even when he ran up and got in their faces. But of course...
Did he try and grab their gun? And guess what? That's their choice to not use deadly force. But Rosenbaum was actually making contact with Kyle and his weapon. So he could have chosen to use deadly force or to use deadly force. Your choice.
Rittenhouse was neither old nor experienced, and so when he foolishly and carelessly pointed his gun at Zeminski in full view of Rosenbaum...
Pointing of Kyle's gun at Zeminski was not demonstrated. It was a blurry, zoomed-in, manipulated image that shows nothing of the sort. It's a huge stretch. Okay, so, should we treat him like an adult or not? I'm not sure what his standard is. If he's... Because usually when kids make mistakes, we are a little more lenient on them. Not saying Kyle made a mistake here in his self-defense necessarily.
He did not know to stand his ground. Instead, he fled in a suspiciously strange direction toward several parked cars, which is very...
So because you run away from conflict... This guy calls you a coward and says you shouldn't run away from conflict. You should try and stand your ground and engage in conflict. So Kyle's wrong for trying to break off contact with this man. This guy is trying to argue against violence, but he wants Kyle to stop and fight this guy. And this, I thought a lot of these stupid things were coming from Vosh, but actually I think Brenton says the majority of the stuff that I was talking about yesterday. Let's rewind a little bit.
Very weird. A suspiciously strange direction toward several parked cars, which is very weird. Like when you're running from someone, the instinct isn't usually to go somewhere isolated and out of the way. You want to get to a place where you can sprint, and you want to get near other people who could help you, or at the very least provide cover for your escape. But Rittenhouse didn't do that. Instead, he lured his first victim to an out-of-the-way place with an obstructive view, slowed, turned, and executed Rosenbaum. The first shot shattering his pelvis, completely disabling him. But Rittenhouse kept firing, eventually executing him with a shot to the back that the defense contends was a mid-air leap, but after the first shot was almost definitely the tiny man falling to the ground.
Well, his hands were on the gun, and you can keep moving after you get shot, right? Like, a lot of people don't even realize they've been shot for a little bit. And let's for a second go back to this bizarre argument that Kyle suspiciously ran towards some cars instead of, toward more crowd. He ran in that direction because that had less crowd in it. He didn't want to run into a crowd of these violent rioters, one of which was already chasing him, so he peeled off to the side. And why are you questioning his decision in which direction to run? You're not exactly... Hindsight is always 20/20. You're not going to calculate the perfect angle and position that will allow the perfect escape route. And he ran between the cars, by the way, so he wasn't blocked off. And he's characterizing this as luring and executing. When Rosenbaum assaulted Kyle, he was previously running around with a fire extinguisher, clearly demonstrating that his intent was to stop fires and stop fires from spreading, not to go around and entrap people and shoot and kill them for sport. This should be considered defamation and slander, especially since it's legally not an execution at this point. The unfortunate thing about stochastic terrorists like Brenton, who increase the likelihood that violence will happen with his words, is there's thousands of others like him. You can't individually put blame and damages specifically on Brent, because there's so many of liars like him out there spreading the same misinformation, all contributing just a little bit to the stochastic terrorism, just a little bit to the likelihood that of violence erupting again, because he's inciting panic and inciting violence against people like Kyle. The responsibility is spread so thin over thousands of people that you can't really pin it anything specific on Brenton, but he's still engaging in this disgusting, inciting behavior.
So he kills Rosenbaum and starts walking away, lying that Rosenbaum drew on him, which, holy shit, that right there shows you criminal intent. Rittenhouse knew Rosenbaum wasn't armed, but he still lied and said he was and had tried to draw on him. So you put yourself there. You're in that crowd and you see this happen. You see a confrontation.
I'm in this crowd. Oh, you mean part of the crowd? No, if I'm Kyle and I'm in the crowd, yeah, I'm going to say whatever I need to say to calm people down and get them to not attack me. But I put myself in the shoes of a member of the crowd. Brent, I thought that civilians weren't supposed to take up the duties of police officers. I thought that they weren't supposed to enforce the law. I thought only police should do that. I thought that your standard was private civilians don't take it upon themselves to enforce the law, to do the duties of police. But all of a sudden, if they're on your side, you're going to break your standard. Isn't that interesting?
A chase, an execution. And you see...
So, to finish the thought, if I'm putting myself in the crowd, no, I'm not going to start attacking the guy who just got in a scuffle that ended in a shot. One, it's stupid. I'm going to get shot, which ended up happening to 3 of the 4 people who had rushed him. 2, it's not my job to run down and catch this assailant. Videotape him, try and get his identity later, but it's not your job, okay?
See the man who performed that execution lying and walking away.
No one really saw what happened. Very few people. And if they saw what happened, they should have seen that Rosenbaum attacked Kyle. So, putting myself in the crowd, Brenton's arguments all fail utterly and miserably, as usual.
Are you really going to tell me you don't have a right to protect yourself in that situation? Yeah, he's
You don't have a right to protect yourself because Kyle did not attack you. Yeah, he didn't attack anyone. He defended himself. But if he shoots someone else, you don't have a right to just shoot him. You don't have a right to just attack him in your own self-defense because he isn't presenting an imminent threat to you. You wouldn't know what happened. You didn't see him actually behave like an active shooter. You just heard he shot someone. You don't know the situation, whether it actually was self-defense or not. Merely someone getting shot is different from an actual full-on active shooter situation.
Walking away, but that's an AR-15. It can fire nearly 500 yards. In fact,
That's a gun. It can fire bullets.
Killed someone while running away. And if you've been hearing shots all...
Correct. So Kyle clearly demonstrated that he did not want to confront Rosenbaum. He clearly wanted to not have some sort of confrontation. He clearly demonstrated that intent, and yet Rosenbaum pursued him, caught up to him, and this is what happened. Play stupid games, you win stupid prizes.
All night, these people who have come from out of town to play cop in burnt-out car dealerships are aggressive. They don't like you. Several of them have pointed their guns at you and your friends, and Kyle's dressed as one of them, and now...
Oh, okay, so some other people pointed their guns at you earlier in the night. Therefore, you're allowed to hunt them down later and attack this random person who's merely associated with people who were pointing their guns at you earlier. So, Brent, I thought you were supposed to treat people in crowds as individuals because they're just crowds of individuals. I didn't know you switched your standards all of a sudden to just treating individuals in a crowd like all other individuals in a crowd, like the bigot that you are, judging an individual by the actions of other individuals. Okay.
Now somebody's dead by his hand, and he's lying about seeing a gun. So what happens here? Well, I'm going to tell you what happens. In a post-Kenosha world, people start shooting to kill. Because of this ruling, people no longer have the luxury of employing less than lethal means to deal with what might be a threat.
No, in a post-Kenosha ruling, the precedent clearly sets the standard that you have to be under imminent physical threat, and merely having shot someone and having a gun does not pose an imminent physical threat to the people around you unless he starts aiming the gun at you and trying to attack other people, which was not the behavior of Rittenhouse. The people who were causing imminent physical threats were the assailants of Mr. Rittenhouse. He did not do anything that would, under this ruling, justify anyone acting in self-defense in the crowd, because he did not pose any imminent physical threat. He did not start attacking anyone in that crowd.
In short, this is a disaster, one that is going to get a lot of innocent people killed. Street protests are not going to stop. And what this means is that many of those protesters going forward will now be armed. This also means that copycats inspired by Rittenhouse's example, young men positively horny for the prospect of winning money and fame by murdering their perceived political opponents, will be drawn to them.
Wow. He thinks that Kyle benefited from this, that he got some kills, some notches on his belt, and he profited money from this. And fame. Kyle got fame. Is this actually how this person, in quotes, thinks that Kyle is glad for this, for the attention he's gotten from this, from the absolute infamy? He's going to have to look over his shoulder for the rest of his life. You think he wouldn't trade this infamy, what he calls fame, for those people's lives back? You think he wouldn't trade all that money that he spent on his defense? You think other people want to go through this? Want to become a target of the left? Want to become a national target from the media? Want to go through a year plus of litigation, not knowing if this jury will convict you or not? No. What provokes further violence is if you convict Kyle Rittenhouse. Then the precedent is set that you can just attack someone in the street and they don't have a right to stop you.
Like moths to a flame, which means that when we have the next George Floyd killing, and we will, the next time this happens, odds are that there will be two groups of armed militants opening fire on each other in American streets.
Let's put that to the test. Odds are. Okay, so the next major protest that happens, and there isn't a armed conflict between two militant groups, we'll go to Brenton and say, how are those odds coming? The next several, because these happen every year, odds are people are going to mind their own business. Now, they're going to get the message that you can't just start a fight and expect not for the other person not to end it.
You know, people, and by people I mean idiots, have been talking quite a bit about civil war in this country. Usually they're dumb kids like Kyle Rittenhouse. They're people that don't understand the consequences of their actions. They have an elaborate fantasy running through their minds, spurred on by hormones and propaganda and tribalistic sectarian bias, inflamed by a failing economic and political system that has robbed them of their immediate future. And they think that this war is something they want. But I've studied civil wars and I've spoken to combat veterans, and I can assure you this is something
I've spoken to combat veterans. Yeah, so is like pretty much everyone. Okay? It's not that hard to know people who've been in the military and to study Civil War. It's like basic shit. Like, leave the house and you'll run into a veteran. Exist, and you probably have a friend who's served in the military. He acts like he's some kind of authority on this. It's just utterly hilarious. And he says they have fantasies of a civil war, and yet he's the one predicting the civil war because of this trial.
That needs to be avoided at all possible costs. No one wins when violence hits the streets. And this.
So why are you inciting violence? Why are you inciting panic? Why are you telling people that this is going to be the end, that it's reasonable to start shooting? You are saying that the outcome of this trial is that it's reasonable to just start shooting anyone at any time, basically. And you're saying that even without the outcome of this trial, that the standard should be that you can start shooting and attacking someone who merely has a weapon in public.
This country.
Or who merely gets in a gun battle in public, you're allowed to just decide to execute that person.
Possible costs. No one wins when.
Without any context, without any trial of what happened.
Violence hits the streets. And this country, for the dumbest of all reasons, a few utterly worthless car lots, has taken a huge step.
Utterly worthless car lots. Okay, yeah. Both of the horrible takes that I couldn't remember who said them yesterday, both came out of this creature's mouth. So, utterly worthless car lots. So these immigrants who built their way up, who depend on these car lots as their survival, their livelihood, they're just utterly worthless to this guy. Just an objectively false statement. How are they worthless? Is his argument, well, in comparison to the lives that were lost, oh, all property is worthless. Well, guess what? They weren't killed in exchange for property. They weren't even killed in defense of property. That was just why Kyle was there. They were killed for assault on Kyle's person.
Towards making that doomsday scenario a reality, when people are allowed to kill with impunity because...
A doomsday scenario. That's the language he goes with. The fear-mongering, the panic inciting. And he thinks this trial is the kind of thing that incites violence. Meanwhile, him and his ilk are the ones that are inciting people to panic that the Civil War is coming because someone was allowed to defend themselves. Because someone reacted reasonably in the face of being assaulted. That now we all have to be worried, and that gun battles in the streets are the reasonable outcome. Jesus Christ.
When people are allowed to kill with impunity because they're scared and have a gun, you start a vicious cycle that...
Again, he shows his intellectual cowardice and dishonesty. The defense never said he's allowed to get away with this because he's scared and he had a gun. No, it was because there was imminent threat of grievous bodily harm, which is the legal standard and, I would say, the moral standard for using deadly force in self-defense. It is the standard Brent is using to say that the crowd had a right to self-defense. It's just that, factually, the case is that Kyle did not present an imminent threat to grievous bodily harm to anyone in the crowd, except for responding to the people who did it to him first, thus giving him the right to self-defense.
Because they're scared and have a gun, you start a vicious cycle that, if left unchecked, is going to end with a few people huddled in a crumbling building surrounded by rotting food with certain knowledge that they have done this to themselves. And that is why the exoneration of Kyle Rittenhouse is an absolute and unmitigated disaster. Thank you.
What? Let's listen to that again.
Is going to end with a few people. You start a vicious cycle that, if left unchecked, is going to end with a few people huddled in a crumbling building surrounded by rotting food with certain knowledge that they have done this to themselves. And that is why...
What? If you exonerate Kyle, you will start a vicious cycle that ends in a doomsday scenario, his words, that ends in people huddled in a shack with rotting food surrounding them. With how does you? That's the point he decides to end on. That Kyle's exoneration will lead to an apocalypse. This is the fear-mongering that I am talking about. I'm just baffled. I don't know what to say. Bullshit baffles brains. It is utter nonsense. How does he get to this point? This is utter insanity. And this is how he ends his opening statement. He thinks that this is a strong point. Exonerate Kyle, and you have doomsday. The utter histrionic hyperbole at play here is just, there are no words for this. And what never-ending cycle is he referring to? Is he talking about street battle? Because clearly they all stopped attacking Kyle once he landed a few shots on those two people. They all backed off at that point. So, is he talking about a national cycle where these are more likely to break out all the time, and this is going to break out into bigger and bigger gun battles? People don't just go into gun battles. They don't just do it for fun, okay? If anything, this case is going to show how easy it is for things to get out of control. So Brent's tactic is to not only repeat all of the failed arguments of the prosecution and add nothing but just completely dialing it up to 11, saying that this is a doomsday scenario, saying that anyone who defended him, they're all just, anyone like him, anyone who defended him, they're all psychopaths. You know, half of America, well, more than half, because this almost all the centrists, unanimously, the jury, random selection of citizens, are all convinced by the cogent arguments of the defense. And this is his attempt to convince people by insulting them, by repeating failed arguments. And meanwhile, this fool just, every debate he's in, he just acts like a actual child, just convinces me only of his own utter insecurity. He can't let a single word of his opponent pass their lips without rolling his eyes and mouthing his rebuttals as if we're supposed to lip read what he's saying, making faces while they speak, just in general, making it clear that he disagrees and disapproves while his interlocutor is speaking.
Clearly that this case falls under, I don't care if a skateboard can or cannot take a head off. Ultimately, a skateboard is a tool of aggression. In this case, there's a physical assault. They were going to be hurt in some way. I would be afraid that he turns it against me, especially if he's explicitly made death threats before it happened. Now, Brenton makes mischaracterizations of the sequence of events. The thing is that pointing a gun in certain situations is a dissuasive tactic, especially to de-escalate a situation in which
just utterly childish, completely irresponsible. This is the kind of rhetoric that leads to people actually committing violence, going out with a grudge. He's excusing attacks of peaceful persons and condemning the actual self-defense of someone being attacked in the name of self-defense. If you care about self-defense, if you care about individual rights, if you care about gun rights, then you have to side with the people who attacked the guy, who were aggressors in this situation, who attacked someone. He has no actual standards. He's just making things up ad hoc to support his position that he holds for one purpose and one purpose only. That Kyle was in opposition to the protest that he, Brenton, favors. Therefore, Kyle is wrong. Period. End of story. Property, therefore, capitalist evil. The one thing Brenton did right, I think, he did not mention state lines argument. So, there you go, folks. There's a fundamentalist that probably we can all agree is utterly batshit. Anyway, guys, thanks for tuning in to Fundie Sunday. And always remember, have a blasphemous Sunday. And dog bless.